History remembers victories, but it also hides the crimes. Behind prison walls, courtroom doors, and government orders, there are ordinary places that have witnessed extraordinary cruelty. Welcome to Bone and Gavel, where we explore the darkest chapters of human history and the justice that followed. Because every crime leaves evidence, and every story deserves to be told. Tonight we examine how S-21 operated, who ran it, and why the Khmer Rouge created one of the most meticulously documented systems of torture in modern history. The gates were sealed, barbed wire was strung from the balconies to prevent desperate prisoners from throwing themselves to their deaths. What had once been Tuol Sleng High School became security prison S-21. But in 1975, everything changed. Its classrooms were emptied and they were transformed into prison cells. Over the next 4 years, between 12 and 20,000 people would pass through its gates. Only a handful would survive. This wasn't simply a prison. It was the centre of a system designed to manufacture enemies. The heart of that system was a terrifying idea. The revolution was constantly under threat from hidden traitors. To understand S-21, we first need to understand the regime that created it. In April 1975, the communist guerrilla movement known as the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh, ending years of civil war. Their leader, Pol Pot, envisioned a radical transformation of Cambodian society. The country would abandon cities, industries, and modern institutions. Instead, Cambodia would become a rural, agricultural state built entirely on collective farming. The new regime called this Year Zero. Cities were evacuated almost immediately. The prison was run by a man named Kang Kek Lu. He was better known by his revolutionary name, Dutch. Before the revolution, Dutch had been a mathematics teacher. But under the Khmer Rouge, he became one of the most feared prison commanders in Cambodia. Unlike many officials in the regime, Dutch was meticulous. He believed in documentation. Every prisoner entering the prison was photographed, every confession was written down, and every execution was recorded. Because of this obsession with paperwork, historians today now know more about S-21 than almost any other prison of the Cambodian Genocide. Ironically, the system used to prove the existence of imaginary conspiracies is the system that was used to convict its architects decades later. These photographs still hang on the walls of the museum today. Thousands of faces staring directly at the camera. Men, women, and children. Prisoners typically arrived at S-21 during the night. Their hands were tied behind their backs. Many had already been beaten or interrogated elsewhere. When they arrived, their first step was registration. Guards removed blindfolds and photographed the prisoners. These photographs still hang on the walls of the prison. Many prisoners appear confused, some are terrified, and others seem exhausted beyond comprehension. What makes these photographs so terrifying is that many of the people in them didn't know what awaited them. After their photograph was taken, prisoners were assigned a number. Their name was very rarely used again. The prison operated under extremely strict rules. Talking was forbidden, Moving without permission was forbidden. Even crying too loudly was forbidden. All of these could result in severe punishments. Prisoners were kept in one of two types of cells. Some were confined in tiny brick or wooden compartments built inside the classroom. Others were chained together in large rooms where dozens of prisoners lay side by side on the floor. If someone attempted to move or escape, the consequence could have been immediate execution. Food consisted mainly of rice porridge. Malnutrition was common. Disease spread easily. But starvation was rarely the main cause of death in S-21. The prison had another purpose: interrogation. Guards used various ways to force prisoners to confess. Beatings were common. Sleep deprivation was widely used. Some prisoners were suspended by ropes. Others were subjected to electric shocks. Interrogators were instructed to extract long written confessions. Interrogation at S-21 followed a specific method. Prisoners were accused of belonging to secret networks or spies. Often they were accused of working for foreign intelligence agencies. Common accusations included collaboration with the CIA or KGB or Vietnamese intelligence. Of course, most of these accusations were completely fabricated. Sometimes these confessions ran for dozens of pages. Prisoners were forced to invent an entire network of imaginary conspiracies. Those names were then used to arrest even more people. In this way, the prison created an endless cycle of accusations.
One of the most disturbing facts of S-21 is that many of the prisoners there were actually members of the Khmer Rouge. The regime was constantly purging its own ranks. Soldiers, party officials, even high-ranking leaders. Anyone suspected of disloyalty could end up in the prison. This internal paranoia intensified in the late 1970s as tensions grew between Cambodia and Vietnam. Once interrogations were complete, prisoners were rarely kept alive. They were moved out and sent to execution sites outside the city. One of the most infamous sites was Chung Ek killing fields. Prisoners were typically taken there at night. The leadership became convinced that Vietnamese spies had infiltrated the revolution. Thousands of people were arrested on suspicion of being Vietnamese spies. Many were sent to S-21. One detail often overlooked is the presence of children at S-21 prison. Entire families were sometimes arrested together. The regime feared that children might seek revenge if their parents were executed. To save ammunition, prisoners were often executed using blunt weapons. Mass graves were dug across the fields. Bodies were buried in large pits. Today, thousands of human remains have been recovered from these sites. As a result, many children were imprisoned alongside their families, and many were killed. Small faces staring into the camera, too young to understand why they were brought there. Others were used to force confessions out of their parents, and their photographs still hang on the walls today. Now, in late 1978, Cambodia was invaded by Vietnamese forces. Relations between the two countries had collapsed. The Khmer Rouge government began to lose control. The discovery shocked the world. Thousands of records were recovered. These records later became some of the most important evidence of the Cambodian genocide. In January 1979, Vietnamese troops entered Phnom Penh. When they arrived at S-21, they found the prison was abandoned. Inside were torture instruments, documents, and bodies that had not been long executed before the guards fled. For decades after the fall of the Khmer Rouge, many of its leaders remained free. Political instability and civil war delayed efforts to prosecute them, but eventually, internal tribunals were established to try the surviving leaders. One of the most significant trials involved Dutch, the commander of S-21. In 2010, he was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to life in prison. The meticulous records that he kept during S-21 played a huge role in his imprisonment. Today, the prison is preserved as Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum. Visitors walk through the corridors where prisoners waited for interrogation. The photographs remain on the walls. Thousands of faces, each representing a life destroyed by a system built on fear and paranoia. S-21 reminds us that atrocities are not always chaotic. Sometimes they're organised, documented, filed away in folders, carried out by ordinary people following orders of a bureaucratic system of terror. And that's perhaps the most chilling lesson of all. It shows how easily cruelty can become routine. This is Bone and Gavel, exploring history's darkest crimes and the justice that followed.